Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're doing a follow-up to the video response I did to Sydney Watson last week because I got some ideas. It was an interesting experiment, and then to see some responses and put some things together, I would love to hear your opinion on this. So we're going to get into what is entitlement, what is self-victimization that is spreading throughout everybody because everybody is so angry and just assuming that everybody else is angry. Look, bleed more, body more reference here. Y'all are already dead. But it's a lot of what I see as resentment, victimhood. It's a power thing, and it is going after people who haven't hurt you because somebody else hurt you. And there is a lot of this, and it is not distinct to a specific person. It is only distinct to those who are aggressively engaged with politics, is what I'm going to say. It doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on, where you are in politics. If you are aggressively involved, I'm seeing this similar thing. So shout out to that one commenter that said, in all honesty, if a female character isn't sexual or hot, then it's not good enough. So before we get started though, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story or something akin to that, the prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we read those prompts together because y'all are creative as heck. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit it to the Fresh Meat feature, the first chapter will be read here on the channel at a random interval, and hopefully that'll help more readers find your work because believe me, they're out there. It's just about reaching as many people as you can, and hopefully I can help with that. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they are available anywhere that you get books, even the local library upon request. So please do check those out. With that said, let's get into this. Since today's video is going to be about entitlement, I did want to mention this thing that I saw this last week, and I'll be doing a longer video on it probably next weekend after I finish the book Might Makes Right by Ragnar Redbeard, because I think it is very important to the conversation that we're seeing around art and AI-generated art and art theft in general. Not even just the AI-generated art, but the art that is being insulted, one, by political talking heads, and two, by the way that Hollywood and the elites are treating art, whether they are the alternative elites or the mainstream elites, because I do think that there is a war being waged and arts and artists are the victims of this war. It has to do with might makes right, and if you're not sure what might makes right mean, it is exactly as it sounds. It is the survival of the fittest. There are no morals for the strong man because a strong man only abides by the morals as long as it is expedient, and then once he is on top, it is only the weak, the servant, the women who are to follow the rules because they are too weak to overpower their enemies. And so that's a lot of what I'm personally seeing. Anyway, this comes in with entitlement, in this assumption of ownership. If you go and look over at the Shad video that I posted last weekend, you'll even see a comment there that tried to use Picasso's words. He said, "Good artists borrow, great artists steal," as a means to justify generative AI theft. And no, that's not what Picasso meant. That is such garbage, and it is such entitlement to other people's labors. It's also funny that so many of these people abide by the idea of might makes right because Ragnar Redbeard was actually a socialist, and this is the socialization of other people's time, skills, and efforts to enrich yourselves, the elite. The only thing that was important to say here is might makes right, and the theft and the entitlement that for some reason, because you like something or because you want something and you are a fan perhaps, then maybe you own it. It's even more aggressive. And this came, obviously we saw it, I was talking about this with the expectations for female characters in the video I did a couple weeks ago, where there's this idea that either the female characters need to be a self-insert for somebody to feel represented or to feel themselves on one side of the equation, and then there's the expectation, the assumption that the female character better be hot, better be a male fantasy in order to appease the other side of the equation. The female character is not simply allowed to just exist. So that's part of the entitlement. The other part of this entitlement has to do with what we are seeing now, and again, we'll get into into a bit more when I do Might Makes Right, because I think sharing a lot of the quotes from that manifesto is going to put a lot into perspective. And I think that there is this war on ownership of this content, which is what has been at the front of this culture war discussion for a while. But when I talk about entitlement, I'm looking at this. Game of Thrones AI completed books removed from being noted in George R.R. Martin's lawsuit. So somebody calling themselves a fan, and I will say that you are not a fan if you stole somebody's intellectual property and determined that it was your own. Let's make a very loud difference right now. Fan fiction is not somebody claiming to create canon. It is something that somebody is creating because they are a fan. It is to enhance the experience, and it is not claiming to be canon. There is so much fun that you can have with fan fiction and with fan art and doing whatever it is that you want to do. But the second that you claim that you are somehow now in charge and in ownership of that thing, you are stepping on the intellectual property of somebody else. If you try to create, like, say, the end of this book because he is not creating it fast enough for you, and maybe he will never create it fast enough for you, that is an entitlement to George R.R. Martin and the Game of Thrones. That is his intellectual property. And we do see this happening with people like Nerdrotic, claiming George had 5 months of a clear schedule thanks to the WGA strike to finish Winds of Winter. BT dubs, it's been 4,473 days since the release of A Dance with Dragons. So that is a justification for theft. And if you scroll down through these comments, you see based. ChatGPT could write a better final season of Game of Thrones than HBO. I can't wait for AI movies. Then we can make the Star Wars EU books into movies and can ignore anything from Disney. So this is all claiming intellectual property from other people. Why? Because it is a battle of dominance. And if you own the intellectual property of the people whom you hate, then you are going to push it down their throats that I have this and you don't. That is the mindset that we have seen in the creative arts for a while. Whether it's been the one side saying we have this, so we are going to denigrate and humiliate and destroy this genre or these characters that you like because political reasons, we're seeing the exact same thing on the other side now, saying we are going to steal this from you because it is a way of stealing artifacts, stealing culture, stealing icons that do not belong to you. And once you claim them, you prove that you have dominated the other side, that you are the dominant, that you have made your might correct. Because there are no rules but the survival of the fittest, who is the strongest. And by claiming the artifacts of whatever is culturally dominant, you are proving that you are in charge. And that's what we're seeing. So anybody that complains about the integrity of the story and then is okay with this, cares about canon, and then they do this, you don't care about canon. You don't care about quality. You care about being in control. Otherwise, you would not be applauding this. This is disgusting and shameful for anybody who calls themselves a fan, for anybody that says that they respect the rights of individuals. You should be ashamed. But it's not actually about the creative arts, is it? It's not about the characters. And whether you like the ending of the characters or not, you can just rewrite it in your fanfic. Look, I have rewritten the endings of certain characters and some of the things that I like because you know what? I didn't want to see them suffer. But that doesn't rewrite the canons, and that doesn't make those characters mine. You don't have a right to steal because you don't think an author or an artist is moving fast enough for you. Because you like something about their art, but you want to tweak some things. So now you're going to put it into Photoshop or an AI generator so it changes things to the way that you like them, and now suddenly it is your art. That's not how it works. So don't pretend you believe in rights or you believe in canon or you believe in continuity and then say this. It is about cultural dominance. And in my opinion, that's why they'd never move on to other properties. Because it's about stealing the cultural icons back, the cultural artifacts back to prove superiority. And that's why they clap when George R.R. Martin is stolen from. But this goes into the whole other thing of might makes right. Again, I'm going to get into that in the future. Just keep that in mind. Now we're going to get into the rest of this entitlement video. I love doing these Saturday videos specifically to get conversation, specifically to get ideas out there of things that I've recognized or things that I feel like I've seen, and to also end up getting more perspective from what other people think, because it's really, really easy to get trapped in like your cone of confirmation of what you think you've seen, of hearing your perspective only. And it's only gotten more easy for that to happen, what with the algorithms the way that they are. And so then you end up seeing all of this unfairness, or you click on something once and then that's all that you see. I swear, last night I ran into something that was doing this, that it was so stupid. And we're going to talk about that too, because it plays into the victimhood and it plays into the grifting, and it plays into exactly the same thing that we saw with the women are never good enough video from last week. So one of the commonalities that I really saw between the comments of those saying all women are being uglified while only paying attention to 3 or 4 characters and ignoring that every Mortal Kombat character pretty much looks disgusting, whether it's from the way that they are created or from their character design in general or from the engine, people kind of ignore that, or, the fact that when he talks about how terrible Kiryu looks from games 3 Yakuza and onward, but 0, 1, and 2, he looks great. And how his character changed. I mean, no comment there, but what's funny to me is this statement.
Representation matters. We've heard this a lot, but I'm going to repeat it again. Representation matters. To see and to hear ourselves on screen humanizes us to ourselves, and it humanizes us to others.
So from that line specifically, the presenter is saying, where am I in this fiction? Why am I not being shown in this fiction? Why was this fiction not made for me? And if you go into any of this discussion about representation, about sensitivity readers, about that sort of thing, which I cover on this channel constantly, or enough because I'm a writer, you see a lot of people complaining about why isn't this main character me? Or the whole idea of sensitivity readers where somebody says, I have a similar aspect as that person, so I'm going to read it to confirm whether or not that person's experiences are accurate to my experiences. So that is literally inserting yourself into the character, making the story your story personally, and with these expectations of that character is disabled, I'm disabled, why isn't that character showing my disability the correct way? And the only correct way is the way that I view it, not how other people have dealt with it. That's been a constant stream, and that's what's behind some of this idea of representation or of accuracy in portraying certain things. It's a direct deposit of the individual complaining into the story saying, why wasn't this made for me? Why wasn't I considered while this was being made? Why isn't this character me? And so what I saw with a lot of the comments, whether they were in Sydney's channel or if they were in mine, was that it was the people complaining that women are ugly, saying, why wasn't this made for me? Why is this character not made to be hot specifically for me? Well, there was nothing wrong with the character design themselves. Maybe they're not specifically your jack-off fantasy, maybe they're not specifically your girl power fantasy, but there is literally nothing wrong with that, and it is an exaggeration of no small bit to go and say a character is ugly as sin because you're not personally attracted to them. Not to mention, it's totally disrespectful to the female characters in general to say the only thing of value they offer is if they are hot enough for you. I don't want to play this game, but I don't go into a game with a male character and think, is this character hot enough for me to be attracted to them? Because the answer is generally no, because I don't work like that. Now, I understand that there is a difference between ways that people interact with media, and that's whatever. I also understand that men think differently than women, and also that there is no monolithic position for men or for women. So the idea of saying this is not subjectively beautiful to me when the character's appearance is not even up for grabs, like there is a problem currently that is consumer entitlement. That there is this idea that you are somehow owed something by the creators of content to specifically be catered to you. Now, if you want specific appearances of something, commission an artist to do things the way that you want to do them. Obviously, nobody can control how you consume stuff, but it is completely dishonest and disingenuous to pretend that you are specifically being targeted or oppressed because a character isn't hot, just as much as you're going to ridicule people for saying, why am I not in these stories? These characters should look more average. It's not an attack on you. And that's not to say that there are not deliberate choices being made, such as Annette in Castlevania being changed from her original character design to something completely opposite, including the role that she played in the story as the damsel in distress being turned into a girl boss that uses magic. That is a deliberate decision to destroy the canon, and that is something completely different than a character not being hot enough for you. I could take you more seriously in making those statements if you differentiated instead of trying to turn every character that you don't like, specifically the appearance of, into some sort of issue that it is not. Another example that I want to give is of this right here, because I saw it this morning while I was on Twitter, which is apparently more and more a mistake because people are just getting less and less tolerable. But people complaining about the model for Mary Jane in the new Spider-Man 2. This is what the character looks like. And then they say this is what the model looks like. Now the model is clearly gorgeous. Let's also not forget that there is some airbrushing going on, that there is Photoshop used to make it look more beautiful, that there is Photoshop used on this image, that this is a specific angle. Where is the candid angle? And you didn't use a candid angle. You used a studio angle, which is one thing, but it's whatever, because we can see that this woman is beautiful. Video games, one, have limitations, not just of the graphics, but what are the engines available that are being used, and then the limitations of the people working on the project. Sometimes it will be deliberate that a character is visibly different. And I could actually believe you that this was made specifically ugly if you didn't go after characters that were not specifically ugly and turned that into some sort of tirade or some sort of political thing when it's not. Here, if MJ is supposed to be considered the most gorgeous of gorgeous beings, and then you go, well, this is deliberately ugly because look at the OP and they did her dirty. I think some people at this point are actually so tricked that they hate something or they hate someone that it's ugly when it's not, because that happens. You can become much more affectionate and much more attracted to somebody based on the way that you feel about them, if you like them or not, if they've done something that you like or if they've done something that you don't like. And you can actually end up finding people absolutely repulsive looking no matter how beautiful they are if they've done something disgusting. So in some cases, I think that there is a lot of anger involved in the entitlement of certain fan bases, whether it's the people saying my character, that I should be written into the story, or this female character and all female characters should be written for me. That is toxic entitlement. You're not there for the story. You're not there for the creator. You're not there for the author or the artist. You are there to be personally entitled. And if you want art to look a certain way, either make it yourself or hire somebody to do it, because it is a bad thing to do to go to a creator whom you said, oh, I support you, as long as you do the things that I want you to do, as long as you say the things that I want you to say, as long as you create the things that I want you to create for. You're not really there for the person, and that's fine for you to come and go. Obviously, I'm not trying to say whether or not you have to support somebody, but there is an entitlement within a fan base when you try to demand a creator do things your way or else they are ungrateful. Now, I think that there are multiple issues going on in this situation where there are justified outrages towards the creators of content, and there are unjustified ones, such as going after appearances of female characters for not being hot enough needlessly. I think that there are a number of people working on that Spider-Man project that, one, may be overworked because of the release schedule that Disney Marvel has going on, but number two, don't care about the project. You're going to have a lot more passion to get stuff correct from people who actually care about the project, but for most, this is just a paycheck. And one where people really don't care because it's literally a remake of a remake of a remake of a remake of a remake. And I can assure you that the fans of Spider-Man are likely much more enthused about Spider-Man than the people working on the project. So why it looks like crap, I would actually probably put it more in that than in some sort of deliberate attempt to make female characters ugly. So we're going to get into those other things, but I don't want you to get the idea that I think all fans or consumers that demand things of certain authors or artists are entitled, because I think that there is a level of gatekeeping that is appropriate. But I also think there is some of this that has gotten out of hand to the point where everything is seen as a personal infliction on those people. Another thing that I see in the discourse of this is all of this assumption of malice for characters not being made to a certain preference. If a female character is a damsel in distress, it's seen as personal malice because of misogyny. If a female character is not pretty enough, it's seen as a personal affliction because it's against pretty women, and it's an ugly Western woman who's afraid of beauty and hates beautiful women and trying to punish us men. If it's a male character who paints his nails, it's obviously some sort of slight against masculinity instead of just being a punkster style with painted nails. Everything is turned into a bigger thing or a political statement when it's not, which is going to get into one of my other complaints, which is bringing all of this political lens reading to arts has been detrimental to literally everybody, and I think that it has made a lot of people go crazy. I may be talking about you. There's also, in the discourse around character design and character choices, I've also seen the assumption of malice behind Novices. I watched a video this morning that was talking about Ironically, also entitlement of consumers, or entitlement in the artist community of people saying, you didn't draw that character dark enough. Why did you give that person more weight or more hips, or why did you make them skinnier? And how people on art communities have been going after other people for not drawing well enough. Or this entitlement where somebody said, if you create, period, you better be able to make fat bodies, skinny bodies, darker skinned people, disabled people. You better be able to do all sorts of things, or else you're a bigot. And that takes out the idea that there are novices, that there is learning, that people draw or create what they are interested in or what they find aesthetically pleasing. And it may not be aesthetically pleasing to you, but it is the choice of the artist. And so instead of understanding that maybe something is a stylistic choice, or maybe something was done because it's a novice learning how to do something, there are people that assume you did this because you're a racist, you did this because you're a sexist, you did this because you're some kind of ist, rather than allowing people to be novices. I've seen the same thing happen in creative writing circles, where readers will pick up a book and assume that a character or a narrative making certain comments about women or describing things in a certain way is because of a misogyny or because of whatever sort of ism, when really it's just an author learning how to write, or it's a novice author. And so there's always this assumption of malice when it's actually just somebody new to writing or new to the arts. And that actually scares people off, stops people from wanting to learn, and makes people more scared of actually trying things out and getting feedback, because they're going to get personally attacked for being novices in the arts. The next thing is individualism has been taken so far that somehow there is a large group of people that think they have the power and authority over the creatives to tell them how to create your version of things and demand it with almost, well, you want fans, don't you? I've seen it with YouTubers where fans go, well, I'm a subscriber, so I should have a say in exactly how you run things because you want my business, don't you? And so customer is correct in some spaces, but not in other spaces. And look, this is where I want to get into where I do think that some consumers have been wronged, but this principle is being applied broadly to everything instead of being controlled to where it's appropriate. One place where I remember seeing this forever years ago was the fan base of Teen Wolf from MTV demanding that steric be a thing and going after the writers to say, we're your fans, we are the ones that are in control, we are giving you views, so your writer's room needs to do what we want it to do. And then I heard that happened with the Arrowverse, and the Arrowverse actually conformed and did what the fans wanted, and it destroyed the Arrowverse. Now that is fan entitlement. There's one thing to say, hey, we're fans, we like this thing and we hope it goes in this direction. It's another thing to get together as a mob and to go and demand things of the creator, to go in your direction and use that as a bludgeoning tool. You're no longer there for the author or for their vision or the story they're trying to tell. You're there so that they can fulfill your fantasies. And you can stop supporting anybody at any time. But it's kind of, for me, a cross of boundaries when somebody says, you will create what I want you to create or else. Look, if you don't like what I'm doing, then you can go somewhere else. I'm creating for me, and I'm hopefully sharing stuff with you that I love, that I've put thought into, and I will take feedback that is applicable to what I'm doing. But for somebody to think that they can control me and my creative decisions because they're using, hey, I view you, so I control you as a means to bludgeon me, I don't think so. Appreciate the support, and I appreciate when people like what I do. But to think that you can demand things of me to that extent is insane. In the same way that if somebody came to you and said, hey, you need to change this character to look more like me, to represent my experiences with an ism or with a disability or with a something else, you need to conform your writing to me. Imagine having like 500 people saying that in 500 different ways. Who do you listen to? Because you're always going to let somebody else down. I'm never writing anybody else's experience or anybody else's viewpoint but my own, but those of the characters. The characters may experience things that I've never experienced, but their versions of what they experience is up to them. At the end of the day, you like or don't like what you like or don't like. Nobody is saying that you have to like Aloy. Nobody is saying that you have to like Moxie. Nobody is saying that you have to like any sort of thing and that you have to support somebody regardless of whether or not they're servicing you. Because there is a point where you're like, okay, you were deliberately insulting me as opposed to you didn't make this for me. There are differences. All of my books are very different. Dead End Drive is a dark comedy / satire. Bodymore is magical realism with like grit and supernatural mystery thriller. I think it's more of a supernatural mystery going on. And then you've got Boom, which is a political satire of sorts. Even though it's not really political, it just has the involvement of the government, so there's no way to get away from politics with that, but it is what it is. Anyway, you don't have to support all things because those are all very different. And so things that I do are going to read better than other things. Like or don't like what you want. But what I've experienced by paying attention to sort of how people are responding and the discourse about creativity among the political classes of people is that in response to a feeling of abused material or personal abuses by creators, people have started taking it out on every piece of creative medium instead of focusing it. And this entitlement has turned into abusing creators who haven't done anything. Now, I understand the response. I'm going to outline a couple of situations in which I understand or have recognized the abuse done to consumers by creators. Not all creators, because you're going to have people in mind that have done this stuff specifically, and that is justified to be angry and to be outraged. But taking this to every single creator who doesn't kowtow to the way that you want stuff created is just as bad as whoever you hate saying, "Why didn't you make things for me?" One of the abuses that has been experienced by consumers or fans of content in the last couple of years or decades has been the adaptation of loved stories or series or franchises or even card games when it comes to Magic the Gathering and D&D, which is not a card game, but if you've known what's going on with D&D, you know. So the adaptation of these stories being taken and used to basically counterfeit creations as studios massively change characters, stories, elements, designs, and it's reasonable to want something that you liked to remain what it was that you were being told that it was. At some point, I think there is also fraud involved in this when a studio takes a beloved property, says, "We are making this thing," they sell you that thing as the thing that you love, but they've changed the major elements. Going back to Netflix's Castlevania, where they've changed Annette. Going back to Netflix's Witcher, where they've changed the focus of that story. Going to Rings of Power, where they've changed that story for people. Going to The Sandman, where they've changed for the fans of that. I think that you would have a lot less of an angry response if these studios and developers were actually honest about what they were doing, instead of trying to sell the idea of what people liked and then present them with something else. Because in addition to that, if you look at what a lot of books look like versus the movies when they come out, they're very, very different from each other. So a completely different adaptation is not all that uncommon. But what I think movie studios especially are not considering is that the properties in games and fantasy that they are reaching into have a very, very different level of fandom involved, where the fan base is not as devoted, the properties are not as loved, and the characters are not as iconic. So you have to have a certain level of love for the content that you are making when you take something that is loved, and you need to respect the consumers and the fans of that content enough to respect the properties and show love and care to the properties that you are taking. If you take stuff and you use those established properties and fans to, one, try to make money, and two, to insult it to their face and then try to still make them pay pigs, you're going to have a problem. And so I can understand why people respond aggressively to things not being done a certain way. That is completely different, though, than attacking a creator for a brand new property or a brand new take just because it's not your style. Another thing that I've observed over the years is not only do these people take beloved properties or beloved stories and change them, but creators, developers, and others involved, like actors. You've got the actress that played Faye and the Cowboy Bebop for Netflix, insulting fans over the changes that they didn't like to the story. So you've got these people that are taking things and mocking others that we have this, we own this, we're gonna do what we want with it, and screw you, and ha ha ha, you can't stop us. And yeah, that is going to create, again, more vitriol. I think this is one of the things I complained about a year or two ago when I talked about ISOM and the politicization of the creative spaces, because I've always been a creative. I've been a creative independently since I was able to start writing, and I went through a theater program and didn't fit in with anybody but watched the politics around me, and then I went to a writing program where it was very political, and I've been in writing groups, and I got kicked out of writing groups for not conforming to political stuff, and I've had to keep quiet about certain opinions. It doesn't matter if where they fall on the spectrum. There's always people that don't want to hear it, that don't like you, that will demonize you and chase you off if they don't like your opinion, and they use that as a way to bludgeon you and control you. So I never wanted to play that game. And so the politicization of the creative space has actually made this worse, where it's actually perceived injustices or political reasons for why the decisions were made, and then the weaponization of isms in order to deflect or ignore actual criticisms and disrespect done to the properties. I'm sorry, but I respect the individual properties, and I also understand that if you need to make changes for an adaptation, it happens. But you don't need to mock people for it. You don't need to lie about it. And if you feel like you have to lie about it, then you usually know that you've done something wrong, and now you're just telling people to get in line and respect it, or else it's an ist. That is going to cause problems, and it is completely unnecessary, and I really don't see the point of doing it in any of the comments sections, other than it's a cheap blow. If you notice when I do any of my book reviews, I specifically avoid using as much political language as possible because I can absorb a book or story or movie without making it political. That is in fact my preference, because I think that politics becomes not just a dividing line, but it becomes poison that destroys the way that anybody can view anything. Like, guys, we're at the point where somebody is saying, if I don't see myself in a book, then it is a personal insult and attack. And others saying, if I don't see a hot woman in a piece of fiction, it is an insult and a personal attack and I'm oppressed. And also taking panty shots out of Resident Evil 4 is somehow oppressive. I'm sorry, I don't feel it. A lot of anger has also been pulled up in this discussion because of perceived slights, discriminations, or prejudices like I just mentioned with Resident Evil 4, like I mentioned with Aloy, like I mentioned with any of the others where we're talking about, oh, they're making these characters ugly and it's because it's against me because I'm a man, or it's against me because I'm a woman, so they didn't make this character average, or they didn't insert me into the story. It's all perceived prejudices. And it's not specifically just to content creation or what exists. Recently, I saw a post going around Twitter that was claiming that a certain percentage of books and trad published over the year were only of certain races, and that needs to be fixed. Like, one of them was 2% of book deals were South Asian, and how the US needs to do better when, if you Google it, the South Asian population of the United States is 2%. Whether it's discrimination that is causing a difference in demographics being published is neither here nor there because we have no way to prove anything. But it still is a perception of unfairness that will lead to a feeling of being owed, which is going to put this entitlement of you need to do this thing for me. To add to that, I want to show you the post initially anyway. So we've got total book deals, October 2022 through October 2023, 70 white, 10 black, East Asian 7, Latino 5, Southeast Asian 3%, South Asian 2%, Native American 1, and Pacific Islander 2. Then you've got breakdowns by genre, where mystery is 89% white, and they're only mentioning white. I don't know why, because what, are you going to recognize any other race or no? But you get all the way down here, graphic novels, picture books, horror novels, or YA, is progressively less white. And so they say that the reason for this is because discrimination. But we've got nowhere where we're getting the data points. This is still being spread around. If you look at it, 1 million shares, 10K likes. So this is being spread around a lot with the perception that people are being discriminated against. It's not counting how many people are not in these other genres like mystery, like horror, like fantasy, because they're actually publishing in YA sections. You only have a certain number of people. So if there is a discrepancy in publication percentages, how many is it that are writing in the same genre? That's not being taken into consideration. How many people are actually publishing percentage-wise or writing percentage-wise? Just because somebody is a certain percentage of a population doesn't mean that there is an equal percentage of that population that are writing. So it becomes an entitlement when you say, hey, look at this population number. I deserve to be published specifically for that, without looking at any other reasons for why that might be. Whether it is a lot of people writing in the same genre, so you're going to have less adult novels of a certain type if most of them are writing YA or vice versa. And then you have this sort of thing with Kosako. Don't even talk to me, Kosako. I remember you, sensitivity reader. You have a lot of this that comes down to then telling other people who are completely uninvolved, you have an easier time than I have an easier time. Are you kidding? We're seeing that there is a different percentage, and nobody is saying anything about any of these genres where there's overrepresentation in racial demographics, if that's the game that we're going to play. Only the ones where there is white, and we're told that you as a white person have a legitimately easier time in every category. That's not true. There is actually probably more competition in others as well. Writing and publishing is a very difficult field to work in. It is hard for everyone, and this idea perceived of discrimination is what's going to cause more issue, more entitlement of I deserve it, regardless of the quality of the book. And oh my gosh, if you just scroll through these, all of them are about attacking white people and saying, give me a better chance. Like, this is not about writing anymore. This is about entitlement of I deserve over you for whatever perceived. And there's not even any information of where this information came from, what the references are, anything. You can just put anything out there. And suddenly now there is entitlement and anger and not an observation of the information. I also saw a tweet in here, I was looking for it, but I can't find it now, that said, go through your books that you've read this year and see how many non-white authors that you've read, and then just start buying and reading non-white authors specifically. And I gotta tell you, I don't pay attention to the author when I pick up a book from somebody that I don't know, because I don't think it's important. I just read the books that I'm interested in reading. And that again is entitlement. Buy my thing, not because of the book, but because of who I am and I'm making demands on you. Including, we go over here to Laura saying, but don't agents say they want to BIPOC work? I looked at 200 agents rep announcements, November 21 to January 22, and 85% of new clients were white, non-Latino. Not perfect data, but it was all I had access to. Again, no references for this. There's no idea of how many people they were looking at, what the percentages of people who applied to them were, and then this idea that you're entitled because you applied, because you're a different race, you should get preferential treatment is wrong. There is no idea behind the qualities of what were submitted, no idea behind if there was AI stuff submitted. There's nothing to go off of but the guess of race within what, a 3-month period, 4-month period, whatever that is. There is nothing here, but it's throwing this idea of discrimination because there's anger involved. Finally, I just want to get to this one with Crocodile Woman saying, reading a trad published rom-com whose author is repped by someone who gave me a form rejection, and now I know that an agent loving a book isn't necessarily blown away by the quality of the prose, plot, or character. Man, it is very subjective. Yes. So the field in general is very competitive, very subjective, and a lot of agents only work on whether or not they specifically are interested in what you're doing or if stuff is to your flavor. And considering how much I write and how much I read, there are many, many examples of low quality stuff that somehow is super, super popular because it fits into a niche. And that's just the way that it is. So making up reasons as to why you are being discriminated against and spreading it and then using that as a bludgeoning tool to try to get ahead of people is wrong. In the same way that assuming there is a malice behind the creation of female characters specifically because you can't jerk off to them, because you don't want to jerk off to them, is also wrong. Like, there is hurt everywhere. And I don't know how much of this is malice and how much of this is delusion from being so involved in the political regime. But that's the other thing that I want to mention in this situation, because I don't assume that all of these ideas or thoughts of discrimination or hurt against that, or feelings of hurt against oneself are all maliciously done or done out of manipulation, but it's an emotional element related to the situation. So as I mentioned before, I've been complaining before about adding political ideology into the artistic or creative sectors. And that's not to say that there hasn't been personal, political, or religious beliefs in art before. All the time I get the response, but art has always been political. It's political sometimes. It's not always political. And when you make it into a tool to spread a specific political message, it's no longer art, it's propaganda, but that's another talk for another time. But increasing political identity has been used to form personal identity for at least a couple of years, if not at least a decade, and getting more and more intense as people identify specifically as a political regime or political belief. These political ideas are then transformed into personal beliefs and part of individual personalities and identities that are considered good or evil, whether you conform to those ideas or not. If somebody's personal beliefs or expressions of something are in agreement, then that person, product, or story is good. If in disagreement, then the person, product, or story is evil. This then turns personal and creative decisions into a personal insult that evokes an emotional response out of the viewer of the content, and that entirely depends on whether or not the viewer of the content thinks that the author or creator agrees with them or not. It turns someone else's little decision for their story into a fight of oppression or unfairness when it's literally generally not that. Sometimes it is that, like I said in some of the other examples earlier in this video. Sometimes there is that. Sometimes there's not that. There is an exaggeration going on. Then you get yourself so buried because you're so emotional and not thinking and so personally invested in this because it is part of your identity. that you can't see your way out and you surround yourself by other people seeing these things. Like I said with that Twitter thread, I clicked on that one thing and I was seeing the seething of all of this unfairness that people were saying over and over and over again all night, because you click something and the algorithm starts feeding you and that's all you see and you start to think that's reality. And I think we've hit a point where most people are not seeing reality and they're surrounding themselves with other people who see the exact same thing as them. And so they believe that there's this idea that's there that's not actually there en masse in the way that they think that it is. Some of these issues are so simple as somebody writing a story that doesn't include you being on their mind when they're writing it. Whether that's because you feel you aren't represented in the main female character, or you don't feel like the main character is hot enough for you, suddenly someone else's creative decisions and their story that they wanted to tell wasn't done to your specifications, and it's not because you're evaluating the story or the character, but you're just complaining that it wasn't made specifically for you. Additionally, what I've seen happen is this assumption that because of someone's personal, political, or social beliefs are different, they must be evil. And then everything after that they see in the worst possible way. Like, oh, you made this female character a damsel in distress? That's because you are a misogynist. Oh, you made this female character want to get married? That's because you are a misogynist. Oh, you made this female character a girl boss who looks ugly? That's because you're a feminist. Like, no, sometimes decisions are just character decisions, and characters are characters are born out of their circumstances. Often, not all the time. In fact, a lot of them are just tools. So there is a difference between the utility and the art. But art is subjective, and authors can write with or without deeper intent in their writing. But the thing is that you also take away from a story what things that the author didn't intend. Look at His Name Was Augustin, and how I saw Augustin as an abusive, demonic asshole, and Swanee as an abusive, demonic woman who was in love with this abusive, demonic asshole. But the narrative treated Joel, the totally fine guy who was completely oblivious to what his wife was angry with him over because she didn't communicate with him. And then she goes around telling everybody that he's a rapist. I think that Feyre in A Court of Mist and Fury is gaslighting everybody, including the audience, to make her the victim and Tamlin the villain, when Tamlin is completely confused by what's going on with Feyre because she keeps lying to him and then telling everybody that he's evil while he thinks that she's kidnapped. The author, this is one of the reasons why crit partners are so important, because you get an idea of how other people are viewing the content that you created, because everybody is not going to necessarily see it the way that you see it. What you might see as support for something, someone else might see as damnation, because of the perspective that you bring to the table heavily influences how you interact with content. I want to talk about Joey in Bodymore and her relationship with the cops. She hates the cops. She thinks that they are all corrupt. She's had bad experiences with the cops that are painted by how they have given her trouble for skateboarding in places, but how they didn't come to her rescue when her father was beating her. Now, somebody could read that and think that I'm making an anti-cop statement. Some people could read that and see that as not an anti-cop statement, because it's a character making a decision. It just depends on whether or not you associate Joey's opinions with my opinions. It also depends on whether you finish the series and you see where Joey's perspective goes. But depending on who you are, you might think that that was a decision made because of hating the cops instead of it being a character decision. The same thing could be said with the idea of Baltimore being this broken down, dirty place that is filled with crime. Is it my perspective or is it Joey's perspective? Are you going to give me grace and assume why I have comments in there about Baltimore? Or are you going to accept that it's the character's choice and it's a decision made for the story, and there is symbolism in the story that includes why Baltimore is the way that it is? You could also look at the fatherlessness and the way fathers are presented in Bodymore in completely different ways. Casey's father killed his mother and was a drunkard asshole, and he eventually gets what comes to him. Let's just say he gets what comes to him. And so Casey doesn't have a lot of respect for authority figures either, because his dad was a bully that he killed. Okay, Casey killed his dad and dumped him in the Bodymore dumping ground. So there's that. Joey's father is a drunken asshole who killed himself when she was 8 years old because he didn't want to be alone. His wife left him, his daughter walked out to go to school, and so he killed himself because he was having a manic depressive episode, thought that his daughter was leaving him and couldn't live with himself, so he killed himself. Then he spent the next bunch of years beating her because the anger and resentment ate him up inside, and so he's a terrible father. Jag's father was an alcoholic who got into a drunk driving accident after he relapsed when he was trying to, be better, and is gone. Jag talks about how he got into fights with his dad because his dad would lose his shit as an alcoholic and they would get to fists. So you see 3 depictions of poor fatherhood in that story, so you could see it as a damnation of fatherhood. But if you look at the story, you look at the individual characters, you see how drastically each of those characters was affected by their father or their lack of father, and how important fatherhood is. It depends on how you approach it, how you take the expression of fatherhood in that story. And let's take the difference of Billy and Ace. So those 2 are in my Western series that I'm doing with Monty, and they're twins. They've got freckles, they've got tan skin, and then they've got some like dusty brown hair. Ace is the brother, Billy is the sister, and Billy only sees her appearance as dirty, despite her and her brother looking exactly the same, but she's a smaller female version and he's a larger male version. She will insult her own skin and feel like she is dirty, feel like she is ugly, and feel like she doesn't have any value because of her appearance. But she'll never think that about her brother, and that's because of how females are trained and told that their appearance matters in this specific way. But she would never think of looking at her brother in that way. It is such an internalized thing. Now you can take that in completely different ways and see it either as my opining that women are supposed to be a certain way. You could see it as her choices of socialization. You can see it as misogyny. You can see it as a whole lot of different things. It just depends on how you approach it. You can also see this love story between Tommy and Marcella as being something that is political, since it is 1889 and they are interracial and they are in the South, so it's illegal for them to be that way, and the trouble that they get into because of that. But it's not a political decision. Still, depending on how much you want to make it into a political issue instead of a human issue, because it's just 2 people who love each other, that's going to affect how you approach this thing. And I know people that will say it is a comment against racism, and I know other people that will say that it is Marcella is a stupid woman that should never have been allowed to choose her own man, and she is the proof that women shouldn't choose their own spouse because she chose a poor man. I know people that will take it in completely disgusting directions instead of just seeing it as 2 people that love each other doing the best that they can in the situation that they're in, which is what it is. And then the third thing, with the same set of characters, you've got 3 very different women involved: Billy, Daisy, and Marcella. Billy is a very quiet girl. She's quiet for a couple of reasons, character developed reasons, but she is very quiet. And you could see that as a character choice, or you could see that as some sort of silencing the woman meme, because she's quiet and generally obedient and generally fairly meek. You could see Daisy as a not like other girls, a free spirit, a disobedient girl, and start trash talking her for not being well behaved, for having the choice to pick who she also wants to be with, and also choosing the criminal over somebody else, and then judge her for that and say whether or not that's a statement on freedom. And then you could look at Marcella, who is just a high society girl who was brought up to be a wife and mother, who only wants to be a wife and mother, and who is that caring spirit, who is that caring person, and then see her as a stereotype who is either misogynistic because she wants to be a wife and a mother, or who is the perfect expression of a trad wife. It just depends on how you look at it and what you bring to your situation, though nobody would say that Marcella's a trad wife or perfect trad wife, since she chose her husband and didn't want to obey her father on that. Which again, poor fatherhood example via Marcella. But you know, Bill was a great dad. Anyway, art and storytelling is supposed to bring people together, give us human experiences to discuss and bond over, or characters that we love, or stories that inspire. A female character shouldn't be reduced to her appearance over what story she has to tell, just as a male character shouldn't. Instead, personal assumptions are made about authors and consumers based on preference, rather than listening to reasoning and marking preferences as good or evil by the listener because of disagreement. Things are far more complicated than the political opiners on art make it seem, which brings us back to entitlement. The entitlement that a character is made for you, that a character is made from your perspective. Looking at Kosako over there that was on the chats, that was like, he wrote a story about the Serbian war, and it was canceled before publication because he was a sensitivity reader, and a bunch of people jumped on him for being insensitive to the Muslims involved in that, and portraying them as bad guys against the Serbians. But if you talk to a Serbian, they're going to have a completely different view of that world. So then you end up with this situation. It's an entitlement of who are you allowed to write for, and who is the loudest in demanding your skills be used for them. Kosako's book was was canceled because of a demand of entitlement that you need to write your story how I would write that story when it's a completely different story. And then you've got the entitlement of I should be published, I should be read because of not from what I'm writing, but because of demographics and all of the insults based on demographics that are immutable. So what does this all have in common? Narcissism and predatory behavior from consumers, from creators, and it's not specifically one or the other. I want to make that very, very clear. There are bad people in the creative side, and there are bad people in the consumer side, and there are bad people in the gatekeeping side, i.e. agents, i.e. publishers. Even look at that Lucky, was it Lucky Red? No, it was the other one. No, it was Lucky Red. That was talking about the diversification of the Westerns. But somebody came to an agent with a book that was about the Chinese railroad and an immigrant story, and the agent said, no, this is too immigrant-y for white people. That's not the consumer base saying they're uninterested. That's the gatekeepers, the agents saying they're uninterested. And then other people getting blamed for the actions of the agents, as we saw in the Twitter thread about all of this stuff. There's so much narcissism and predatory behavior in kicking other people down the ladder in order to climb up. You owe it to me to represent me in your story. You owe it to me to write hot women for me to jack off to. You owe me panty shots and horror games. You owe me to express my opinions, or you are evil. You owe it to me to write my book. You owe it to me to at least buy your book by doing the things that I want you to do. All of this for no reason other than to demand something of creators that you won't sit down to do yourself. What's there to do about this? And what's there to do about any of this? Because like at the end of it, what's going on? Personal opinion, personal free will, and sadness. That's what's really happening. So what's there to do? I don't know. Honestly, I want to present that to you after giving this topic, which is why I like the Saturday topics, just to get people thinking, just to get a touch on what everybody else is seeing or what they think. There's nothing to do about this, but to just say this is what I see and I think it's sad, and I hope that my characters will be loved not because somebody jacks off to them or because they see themselves in them for looking exactly the same, but maybe you share a personality trait or you empathize with them, or maybe you feel inspired by them for their bravery or for their honor or for the way that they treat people. I hope that you find anything of value in what I do, but I don't expect anybody to, and I will only change things that make sense for the characters, not because somebody demands it of me. And that goes for how I present myself as a person and how I write. People have free will and emotion that will guide their decisions and how they view things. I'm not saying that I'm right in any of what I've said today, but I can say what I've seen. And I hope to get your thoughts on it. All that's left is to just say that it's disheartening and it's disappointing, and I hope that there is something better in the future for the most part, because you can't help everybody. Not everybody wants to be helped, and not everybody sees a problem in anything. But I can still say that I think this is really sad. And I think it's really sad to see the way that people have politicized everything. I think it's sad to see people throw around random insults of isms because of disagreement, or bigotry that is so common because it's appropriate to bigotry, because you've decided, oh, you don't like something, so I'm gonna call you an ist and not engage in that conversation. You're not going to open-mindedly approach somebody about what you have just bastardized when it comes to Cowboy Bebop because you would rather just call people sexist. You're not going to approach a property with an open mind for what the story is trying to tell because the character is not hot enough. That's just really sad to me, but it's the way that you're interacting with media, and all I can say is I'm probably going to be poor forever because I don't take advantage of people's emotional states to feed them what they want to hear in order to make money. And it's really sad to me how many people and channels actually do that, to the point that I think a lot of people have gotten mass hysteria and have gotten delusional to only see things the way they see things rather than what is the truth? I don't know. I could be entirely wrong. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?